They changed my locks while I was watching my mother die. When I got home, another woman answered my door wearing my bathrobe. My husband stood behind her with a smile on his face. He told me to leave. That this was her house now. That I'd signed it all away. I stood on my own porch, locked out of the home I paid for, and he actually thought he'd won. But let me tell you something. You don't steal from a woman who built a 15-clinic empire with her bare hands. You don't betray a woman who knows exactly where every dollar came from. Because 3 weeks later, FBI agents walked into his lawyer's office and put him in handcuffs. 14 years in federal prison. And I got every single thing back. This is how I did it. And if you stay till the end, I'll tell you the one mistake he made that brought his whole plan crashing down. Don't go anywhere. This story gets better. Welcome to Reality Stories Hub. While you are here, please hit the subscribe button and comment your view on the story and where you're watching from. Let me tell you about the day my entire world turned upside down. But before I get there, you need to understand who I was and what I had built with my own two hands. My name is Elena, and I'm 42 years old. For the past 20 years, I poured every ounce of my energy into building something from absolutely nothing. I started with one tiny dental clinic in a neighborhood where most people were afraid to invest. The building was run down, the equipment was secondhand, and I worked 16-hour days just to keep the lights on. But I believed in something bigger. I believed that everyone deserved quality health care, regardless of their zip code. Year after year, I kept pushing. One clinic became 2. 2 became 5. And before I knew it, I had built a network of 15 dental clinics across 4 states. Every single dollar that came through our front door, I earned it. Every luxury my family enjoyed, every vacation we took, every piece of furniture in our beautiful home in Austin, Texas, I paid for all of it with my own sweat and determination. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're wondering about my husband. His name was Derek, and when we first met, he was working in real estate. He was charming, confident, and he told me he loved how driven I was. We got married when I was 27, and for the first few years, everything felt perfect. We were a team, or at least that's what I thought. About 10 years into our marriage, Derek quit his job. He said he was tired of the corporate world. He said he needed time to find himself, to figure out what he really wanted to do with his life. He talked about starting his own business, maybe writing a book, becoming a consultant. And because I loved him, because I believed in supporting your partner through everything, I said okay. I told him to take all the time he needed. Looking back now, I can see how foolish I was. But love does that to you, doesn't it? It makes you overlook things you shouldn't. It makes you excuse behavior that should have set off alarm bells in your head. 10 years. For 10 whole years, Derek didn't work a single real job. And I just kept working harder and harder, building my empire while he lived like a man without a care in the world. I told myself it was fine. I told myself that marriage was about supporting each other, and maybe this was just my season to carry the load. But then things started changing in ways I couldn't ignore anymore. Derek started spending 3, sometimes 4 hours at the gym every single day. He bought new clothes, expensive brands I'd never seen him wear before. He got a trendy new haircut, upgraded his phone, and suddenly there was a password on it. A password he'd never had before. When I'd come home after 12-hour shifts at the clinics, exhausted and hungry, Derek would barely look up from his laptop. We stopped having dinner together. We stopped talking about anything real. Our conversations became shallow, surface level, like we were strangers sharing a house instead of husband and wife. I'd lie in bed at night, staring at the ceiling, feeling this growing distance between us. But I kept pushing those feelings down. I kept telling myself it was just a phase, that we'd get through it, that love was supposed to be hard sometimes. Then everything changed in a single phone call. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and I was in the middle of reviewing patient files when my phone rang. It was my younger sister, calling from Phoenix, and her voice was shaking so badly I could barely understand her. Our mother had collapsed at the grocery store. A stroke. They'd rushed her to the hospital, and the doctors said it was serious. I felt my whole world tilt. My mother had always been my rock. She raised 3 daughters on a teacher's salary after our father left. She taught me everything about strength, about building something from nothing, about never giving up no matter how hard life gets. The thought of losing her made me feel like I couldn't breathe. I dropped everything. I booked the next flight to Phoenix and threw clothes into a suitcase with shaking hands. Derek drove me to the airport, and I remember thinking it was strange how cheerful he seemed. He kept saying things like, Take as long as you need, baby. Don't worry about anything here. I'll handle everything at home. He kissed me goodbye at the airport drop-off, and it was the warmest he'd been toward me in months. I remember feeling grateful in that moment, thinking maybe this crisis would remind us both of what really mattered. Looking back now, I should have known right then that something was terribly wrong. I spent 2 weeks in Phoenix, sitting by my mother's hospital bed, watching her fight for her life. Those were the longest, hardest weeks of my entire life. I barely slept. I barely ate. I just sat there holding her hand, praying she'd open her eyes and tell me everything was going to be okay. And she did, because my mother is a fighter, just like she taught me to be. By the end of those 2 weeks, she was talking again, making jokes, complaining about the terrible hospital food. The doctors said she'd make a full recovery with time and physical therapy. I was so relieved, so grateful, that I decided to fly home 3 days early to surprise Derek. I wanted to see him, to hold him, to remember what it felt like to be a team again. That surprise was about to become mine instead. I'll never forget pulling into my driveway that Thursday afternoon. The sun was shining, the neighbors were mowing their lawns, and everything looked perfectly normal. Except for one thing. There was a bright red sports car parked in my usual spot. I figured maybe Derek had a friend visiting, so I grabbed my suitcase and walked up to my front door. That's when everything started to feel wrong. I put my key in the lock and turned it. Nothing happened. I tried again, jiggling the key, thinking maybe the lock was stuck. But no, the key just wouldn't turn. My heart started beating faster. I tried one more time, and that's when the reality hit me. Someone had changed the locks on my own house. My hands were shaking as I rang the doorbell. I stood there on my own front porch, waiting for my own door to open, and I had this sick feeling in my stomach that my life was about to change forever. The door opened, and a young woman stood there. She couldn't have been more than 28 years old. Long blonde hair, bright blue eyes, and she was wearing a bathrobe. Not just any bathrobe. My bathrobe. The silk one with my initials embroidered on the chest that Derek had given me for our anniversary. She looked at me like I was a stranger. Like I was someone selling magazines door to door. And then she smiled this sweet little smile and said, "Can I help you?" I couldn't speak. I literally couldn't form words. I just stood there staring at this woman in my doorway, wearing my clothes in my house, asking if she could help me. Finally, my voice came back. "Who are you? And why are you in my house?" Her smile got bigger. "Oh, you must be Elena. Derek told me you might come by. He said you signed the house over to him, and he gave it to me. So technically, this is my house now." Before I could even process what she'd just said, Derek appeared behind her. My husband of 15 years. He put his hand on her shoulder in this casual, comfortable way that told me everything I needed to know. He looked shocked to see me standing there, but not guilty. Just annoyed, like I'd interrupted something important. "Elena, what are you doing here? You weren't supposed to be back until Sunday." I felt like someone had punched me in the chest. "What am I doing here? Derek, this is my house. Who is this woman, and why is she wearing my robe?" He actually sighed. Like I was being dramatic. Like I was overreacting to something completely reasonable. "This is Vanessa. We've been together for 1.5 years. I was going to tell you eventually, but you've been so busy with work. There was never a good time. And actually, this isn't your house anymore. I had my lawyer draw up the paperwork while you were gone. You signed over your interest in the property before you left for Phoenix. It's all legal and documented." I felt dizzy. I signed nothing. I never signed anything, Derek. Vanessa stepped back, and Derek moved fully into the doorway, blocking my view of my own home. "Yes, you did. Remember that meeting with my lawyer, Robert Chin? You signed a quitclaim deed. I have all the paperwork. Now, I'm going to need you to leave. Your personal belongings are boxed up in the garage. You can pick them up tomorrow during business hours." And then he closed the door. My husband closed my own door in my face. I stood there on that porch for what felt like forever, just staring at the closed door, trying to understand what had just happened. Then my shock turned into rage. Pure, burning rage. I pulled out my phone and called the police right there from my driveway. 2 officers showed up about 20 minutes later. I explained everything, my voice shaking with anger and disbelief. Derek came out with a folder of papers. He showed them documents with my signature on them. Except I had never seen those papers before in my entire life. The officers looked uncomfortable. The older one, a man with gray hair and tired eyes, told me it was a civil matter. He suggested I get a lawyer and work it out in court. They couldn't arrest anyone over a property dispute, even if I insisted the signatures were forged. I watched those officers drive away. I watched Derek give me one last smug look before closing my door again. And I sat in my car in that driveway, shaking with anger so intense I thought I might explode. Finally, I drove to a hotel. I checked into a room and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the generic painting on the wall, trying to process what had just happened. My husband had stolen my house. He'd replaced me with a younger woman. He'd changed the locks while I was caring for my dying mother. But as I sat there in that hotel room, something shifted inside me. The shock started to fade, and in its place came something cold and clear and determined. Derek thought he'd won. He thought he'd outsmarted me, taken everything I'd built, and there was nothing I could do about it. He had no idea who he was dealing with. I picked up my phone and called my business attorney, a woman named Patricia who'd handled all my contracts for years. When I told her what happened, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then she said, "Elena, listen to me carefully. Do not contact Derek. Do not go back to that house. Let me look into this. If he forged your signature, we'll prove it. But you need to be patient. Can you do that for me?" I told her I could. But patience wasn't what I had in mind. I was about to teach Derek the biggest lesson of his life. The next morning, I woke up in that hotel room with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't going to fall apart. I wasn't going to cry and beg Derek to take me back. I was going to do what I'd always done when faced with a problem. I was going to fight, and I was going to win. The first call I made was to a forensic accountant named James. I'd heard about him through a colleague who'd gone through a messy divorce. James specialized in finding hidden assets, tracking money trails, uncovering financial fraud. If Derek had been planning this, there had to be a money trail. And I was going to find it. I gave James access to everything. Every bank account, every investment portfolio, every financial record from our 15-year marriage. I told him to dig deep, to look for anything unusual, anything that didn't add up. He told me it would take a few days, maybe a week. It took him 4 days to find the first red flag. And once he found that, everything else started unraveling like a cheap sweater. Derek had been stealing from me. Not just recently, but for years. It started small, transfers of a few $1,000s here, and there into accounts I didn't know existed. Then it got bigger. Much bigger. He'd created shell companies with names that sounded legitimate. He'd moved money into offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. He'd forged my authorization on transfer documents, probably practicing my signature until he got it perfect. When James finally gave me the total, I felt sick. $2.7 million. Derek had stolen $2.7 million from me over the course of our marriage. Money I'd earned with my own hands, working 14-hour days, missing holidays and weekends, sacrificing time with friends and family. But James found something else too. Something that made the whole picture suddenly come into focus. There were connections between Derek's lawyer, Robert Chin, and Vanessa. They'd worked together before. Not just once, but multiple times. James found court records showing that Vanessa had been involved in fraud cases in Nevada and California. She'd run scams on wealthy men, convincing them to put property in her name, then disappearing with the assets once the deals closed. And Robert Chin had represented her in at least 2 of those cases. This wasn't just Derek having an affair. This wasn't just a midlife crisis or him falling in love with someone younger. This was a coordinated con. Vanessa had targeted Derek specifically because of my wealth. She'd probably spent months or even years grooming him, making him feel special, convincing him that he deserved more than being married to a woman who worked all the time. And Derek, blinded by his ego and probably flattered by the attention of a younger woman, walked right into the trap. The plan was brilliant in its simplicity. They'd forged a quitclaim deed to transfer the house from me to Derek. Then Derek would transfer it to Vanessa. They'd sell the house quickly for its market value of about $1.2 million, split the money 3 ways between Derek, Vanessa, and Robert, and disappear before I could untangle the legal mess. It would have worked too. On someone else, it would have absolutely worked. But they made one critical mistake. One oversight that was about to bring their entire scheme crashing down. That house they were living in, celebrating in, planning to sell, it wasn't in my personal name. It was owned by Elena's Dental Group, my corporation. I'd structured it that way years ago on the advice of my accountant for tax purposes and liability protection. The house was a corporate asset, not a personal one. Derek had never paid attention to those kinds of details. He just enjoyed living there, enjoying the lifestyle my success had provided. He had no idea how I'd structured my assets. The quitclaim deed he'd forged was completely worthless. You can't sign away property you don't personally own. Every single document Robert Chen had drawn up was invalid. The house was never Derek's to give away. It was never Vanessa's to take. I could have shut the whole thing down immediately. I could have walked in there with my corporate documents and had them both arrested for trespassing. But I didn't. I wanted them comfortable. I wanted them confident. I wanted them to think they'd gotten away with it. Because I wasn't just going to take back my house. I was going to make sure all three of them went to prison. I contacted the FBI. When you steal nearly $3 million and move it across state lines, that's a federal crime. When you forge documents and commit wire fraud, that's federal. When you run a conspiracy to defraud someone of their property, that's federal. I met with 2 agents in a small office in downtown Austin. I handed them everything James had found. Bank records showing the stolen money. Examples of forged signatures. Email trails between Derek, Vanessa, and Robert. Phone records showing hundreds of calls between them over the past 2 years. The agents looked at everything carefully. Then the younger one, a woman named Agent Rodriguez, looked up at me and said, "Mrs. Grant, we've been looking for a way to build a case against Robert Chin for 3 years. He's been running variations of this scam all over the Southwest. We just needed someone to give us enough evidence to move forward. You just handed us everything we need." They told me they'd need a few weeks to build the case. They needed to gather more evidence, record some conversations, connect all the dots in a way that would hold up in court. I told them to take all the time they needed. For the next 3 weeks, I played the perfect victim. I had Patricia send letters to Robert Chen's office proposing settlement negotiations. I acted defeated, exhausted, like I just wanted this whole nightmare to be over. Like I was ready to walk away if they'd just give me something small to start over with. Derek started calling me, and I answered. He sounded so pleased with himself, so confident. He actually told me, "You'll be fine, Elena. You're a survivor. You'll build it all back. You always do." The audacity of this man who'd stolen everything from me, telling me I'd be fine. Everything came together on a Tuesday morning 3 weeks after I'd first walked in on Derek and Vanessa. Patricia had set up a final settlement meeting at Robert Chen's law office. She told them we were ready to negotiate the final terms, that I just wanted to sign the papers and move on with my life. Derek agreed immediately. So did Vanessa. They probably thought they were about to close the deal, about to walk away with everything they'd stolen. I barely slept the night before. Not because I was nervous, but because I was running through everything in my mind, making sure every piece was in place. The FBI had assured me they were ready. Agent Rodriguez had called me the day before and said, "We've got everything we need. Tomorrow we move." I wore a simple black dress to the meeting. I wanted to look defeated, exhausted, like someone who'd been beaten down and was ready to surrender. Patricia picked me up from my hotel, and we drove to Robert Chen's office in silence. She squeezed my hand before we got out of the car. "You ready for this?" she asked. I nodded. I've never been more ready for anything in my life. We walked into that building, took the elevator up to the 5th floor, and entered Robert's office. The receptionist led us to a conference room, and that's where they were all waiting. Derek sat at the conference table, wearing a suit I'd never seen before. Probably bought it with my stolen money. He looked confident, relaxed, like this was just another Tuesday for him. Vanessa sat next to him, dressed in designer clothes, her hand resting possessively on his arm. Robert Chin sat at the head of the table, papers spread out in front of him, looking every bit the successful lawyer who thought he'd pulled off the perfect crime. They all looked up when Patricia and I walked in. Derek actually smiled at me. Not a warm smile, but a pitying one. Like he felt sorry for me. "Elena," he said, "I'm glad you decided to be reasonable about this. I know this has been hard, but it's really for the best. We both know the marriage was over." I didn't say anything. I just sat down across from him and folded my hands on the table. Robert Chin cleared his throat and started going through the settlement terms. I would walk away with nothing from the house. 0. I would also forgive any marital debt, which was his way of trying to make me agree not to come after the money Derek had stolen. In exchange, they wouldn't sue me for breach of marital contract, which wasn't even a real legal thing. It was insulting. It was absurd. It was exactly what I needed them to think I'd accept. Patricia pretended to review the documents, asking questions, making notes. Derek kept glancing at his watch, like he had somewhere more important to be. Vanessa was scrolling through her phone, barely paying attention. Robert looked bored, probably thinking about his cut of the money. Finally, Robert slid a document across the table to me. "Just sign here, Mrs. Grant, and we can put all of this behind us." I picked up the pen. I looked at the document, at my name typed at the bottom of the page. I could feel Patricia tense beside me, waiting. I signed it. Derek's whole body relaxed. He actually let out a breath, like he'd been worried I might change my mind at the last second. "I'm glad you're being smart about this," he said. "You'll be fine. You're a survivor." Vanessa leaned over and whispered something in his ear. He laughed. Robert started gathering up the papers, sliding them into his briefcase with a satisfied look on his face. That's when Patricia stood up and walked to the conference room door. She opened it wide, and 6 FBI agents walked in. You should have seen their faces. Derek's smile disappeared so fast it was like someone had flipped a switch. Vanessa let out this little gasp and grabbed Derek's arm. Robert actually stood up, knocking his chair backward. Agent Rodriguez stepped forward and held up her badge. "Robert Chin, Derek Grant, Vanessa Morrison, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, wire fraud, money laundering, identity theft, and forgery." The other agents moved quickly, professionally. They pulled Derek to his feet and turned him around to handcuff him. He kept saying, "This is a mistake. This is a huge mistake. We can explain everything." But there was nothing to explain. The agents had recordings of Derek admitting to forging my signature. They had the money trail showing exactly where my stolen millions had gone. They had evidence of Robert and Vanessa running this same scam on at least 4 other people across 3 states. Vanessa started crying, mascara running down her face. I didn't do anything wrong. Derek said it was all legal. He said she'd signed everything. Robert tried to run. He actually pushed past one of the agents and headed for the door. 2 agents tackled him right there in his own office. They pressed him face down on his expensive carpet and cuffed his hands behind his back while he shouted about police brutality and his rights. I stood up slowly and walked around the table. I stopped right in front of Derek. He was cuffed now, an agent on each side of him, and he looked at me with this mixture of shock and confusion and the first hints of real fear. I spoke quietly, so quietly that only he could hear me. "You thought I was just going to let you take everything from me. You thought I was too busy, too tired, too defeated to fight back. You forgot something important, Derek. You forgot that I built an empire from nothing. And if I can build it, I can absolutely tear you apart." Then I stepped back and let the agents lead him away. Agent Rodriguez stayed behind for a moment. She handed me a card with a case number on it. "We'll need you to testify, but with all the evidence we have, this should be pretty straightforward. You did good work here, Mrs. Grant. A lot of people would have just walked away." I took the card. I don't walk away from what's mine. The trials moved faster than anyone expected. With all the evidence the FBI had gathered, with the recorded phone calls and the money trails and the testimony from other victims, Derek's lawyer advised him to take a plea deal. He got 14 years in federal prison. Vanessa got 10 years. Robert Chun, with his history and all the other victims willing to testify, got 18 years and was permanently disbarred. I sat in that courtroom the day Derek was sentenced, watching as they led him away in handcuffs. He looked back at me once, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Regret, maybe, or just the realization of what he'd lost. I didn't feel triumphant in that moment. I didn't feel happy or victorious. I just felt tired. Tired of fighting, tired of being angry, tired of carrying around all this hurt. But I also felt something else. I felt free. The court ordered Derek to repay every penny he'd stolen from me, plus damages. They seized everything he'd bought with my money. That red sports car Vanessa had been driving got sold at auction. The designer clothes, the expensive watches, the gym membership where they'd met, everything got liquidated. I got my money back. Every single penny of my $2.7 million. The day after Derek was sentenced, I moved back into my house. Patricia came with me, helping me carry boxes. We walked through that front door together, and I stood in my foyer just breathing in the air of my own home. It felt different. It felt like mine in a way it never had before. I donated everything that belonged to Derek. Every piece of clothing, every book, every item that reminded me of him went to charity. I repainted the master bedroom. I replaced the furniture. I brought in an interior designer and made that house into a space that was completely, utterly mine. My mother came to stay with me while she continued her recovery. She sold her place in Phoenix and moved into my guest room. Having her there healed something in me I didn't even know was broken. We'd sit on the back porch in the evenings, drinking tea and watching the sunset, and she'd tell me how proud she was of me. Not for the money, not for the success, but for the strength I'd shown, for refusing to be a victim, for fighting back when it would have been easier to just walk away. The dental clinics kept growing. I opened 6 more locations, all of them in underserved communities where people needed affordable, quality dental care. I hired more dentists, more hygienists, more administrative staff. I created a legal defense fund for fraud victims, people who'd been scammed the way Derek tried to scam me. I started speaking at conferences about financial literacy, about protecting your assets, about the importance of having your name on everything that matters. I shared my story over and over, because I knew I wasn't the only successful woman who'd been targeted by someone who wanted to take what she'd built. I'm 43 now, single, stronger than I've ever been in my life. People ask me if I'm ready to date again, if I'm looking for love. The honest answer is no. Not right now. Maybe someday, but right now I'm focused on building something even bigger than before. I've learned to trust my instincts again. When something feels wrong, I pay attention. I don't make excuses for red flags. I don't convince myself that love means accepting behavior that hurts me. I've learned that the right person will add to your life, not subtract from it. Sometimes people ask me if I'm angry, if I hate Derek for what he did to me. The truth is, I don't think about him enough to hate him. He's serving his sentence in a federal facility somewhere in West Texas, and that's exactly where he belongs. He made his choices. He thought he could ride on my success forever and then discard me when someone younger and more exciting came along. He learned the hard way that you don't steal from a woman who built an empire from nothing, because she knows exactly how to take you apart, piece by piece, until there's nothing left. The biggest lesson I learned from all of this is simple. Your name on the paperwork matters. Not just on the house, but on everything. Bank accounts, investments, businesses, cars, retirement funds, everything. I don't care how much you love someone. I don't care how long you've been married or how much you trust them. Protect yourself. Protect what you've built. Because the person sleeping next to you can become a stranger overnight. And when that happens, you need to make sure you're not left with nothing. My house still stands on that hill in Austin. The locks have been changed, and this time I'm the only one with a key. The garden my mother planted is blooming with roses and lavender. The clinics I built are serving thousands of patients across 4 states. And every morning when I wake up in my own bed, I'm reminded of what I accomplished. Not just the business success, not just the money or the houses or the vindication in court, but the fact that I stood up for myself when it would have been easier to fall apart. I fought back when someone tried to take everything from me. Derek thought he could steal from me while I was vulnerable, while I was caring for my dying mother, while I was at my weakest point. He thought I'd be too broken to fight back, too exhausted to care, too defeated to do anything but accept what he'd done. He was wrong about all of it. So that's my story. That's how I went from being locked out of my own house to watching my husband get locked up for 14 years. The biggest lesson in all of this? Never underestimate a woman who built everything herself. She knows exactly where the real power is, and she'll use every bit of that power to protect what's hers.